Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Well, it's always nice for me to get these those introductions, and that was an especially nice one, and I appreciate that, Jerry. The reason I like it is because I'm Dick and I'm an alcoholic. And I spent so many years of people saying nasty things about me that it seems to be a nice change to come up and have people say a few nice things about me, and I do appreciate that, even if you have to stretch a little bit, Jerry. But I am pleased to be here this afternoon, and this is a lovely conference, and I did take the time out to come and participate in it myself because there are so many good speakers, and I certainly haven't been sorry because it's really been terrific. What I'm going to talk about is sexual dysfunction in the alcoholic. And it's really two subjects that are very dear to my heart, sex and alcoholism. Alcoholism is dear to my heart because I'm a recovering alcoholic. Sex is dear to my heart because I'm a recovering sexually dysfunctional person. Now, I'm not going to tell you the way it was and what happened and what it's like now. But I am going to share with you some of the things I learned because of having that problem and perusing all the literature and attending Masters and Johnson's seminar and Dominia Renshaw's seminars at Loyola University and doing sexual histories and interviewing alcoholics, 6,000 to be exact, at Brighton Hospital over the past 6 or 7 years. So I have accumulated a lot of information, and I thought you may be interested in hearing about it. Now, when I was a drinking alcoholic, or even way back when I was in medical school, I thought sexual dysfunction, you were either impotent as a male or frigid as a female, and I didn't think there was any more to it than that. However, in recent years, of course, we know that there's a lot more to sexual dysfunction. Let's see, where does this go on? There's a lot more to sexual dysfunction than just frigidity and impotence, and now the DSM-3 describes 4 different types or 4 different phases of sexual dysfunction. You can have a problem in the desire phase, you can have a problem in the excitatory phase, you can have a problem in the orgasmic phase, or you can have a problem in the recovery or the resolution phase. And alcohol actually causes sexual dysfunction in all 4 of the phases, and I'll be talking about that this afternoon. I think most of us alcoholics at least, have come to believe or get to know that if you get too drunk, you can't participate. So we've all known that experience, or at least I have, and I'm sure a lot of you had. So that we got used to, but we always thought that we knew that we'd be better in the morning. As soon as you sobered up, we thought that everything was going to be all right. And this is not, of course, the case. Alcoholism causes, and drug abuse, cause a lot of sexual problems that can go on for weeks and months, and in some cases even years after you stop drinking. I am reminded of the legend about Winston Churchill when it comes to this, and I don't know if you heard it or not, but a number of years ago, Winston Churchill was at a cocktail party, and Lady Astor was there. And Winston was getting pretty tipsy, as Winston is prone to do sometimes, I'm told. And Lady Astor went up to him, and she looked down her nose at him, and she said, "Sir Winston, you are disgustingly drunk." And he looked at her unabashed, as Winston can do, and he said, "I know, Lady Astor, but you are disgustingly ugly, and I'll be sober in the morning. Now, I don't know anything about Winston Churchill's alcoholism, and I certainly don't know anything about his sex life, but if Winston Churchill had been a sexually dysfunctional alcoholic, his observation would not have been true because he would not necessarily have recovered from either his alcoholism or his sexual dysfunction come the next morning. So this is what we come to realize as studying the various stages of dysfunction and types of dysfunction in alcoholism. It does not go away the next day, and let's look into that just a little bit. Now, what are the causes of sexual dysfunction in alcoholism? Well, I've pretty well narrowed it down to 5 different types of dysfunctions. There's some learning processes that occur as a result of alcoholism and some of our myths in society that keeps us from functioning well sexually. And we have the physiological changes that can occur. Then there's thinking disorders that come as a result of the drinking that keeps us from having recovery. In other words, it has to do with low self-esteem and so forth. Then there's the feeling disorders that I heard so much about at this conference, the bad feelings, the depressions, and so forth. And these feeling disorders cause problems with intimacy. And if you can't be intimate with somebody, emotionally intimate, it can become quite a problem to be sexually intimate. And then we have the psychiatric disorders, including the depressions and so forth, that may actually be caused by alcoholism. So let's go over those one at a time. The first place is the faith that we have in drugs and alcohol that causes a lot of problems. Alcohol is an aphrodisiac, and this, of course, is what everybody thought they knew for a long time, but now we know actually it is. Actually, small amounts of alcohol increases the male hormone in both sexes and therefore gives them increased desire. So what the male finds out, and of course the female too, that when she drinks or he drinks, it increases their desire a little bit. Now actually, Freud pointed out there are 2 basic drives. There's the sex drive and there's the drive for separation. Usually that ends up in being a hostility drive. And if we hit the right amount of sex drive, symbiosis, and the right amount of hostility drive, separation, and individuation, the 2 together cause intimacy. And alcohol then improves that. Alcohol increases the sex drive, decreases the hostility drive, and therefore the person is apt to have more intimacy. And that's exactly what we see. Small amounts of alcohol, the person becomes gregarious, he becomes virile or loving, and they really do get intimate, and therefore alcohol is called a sexual lubrication drug or a gregarious drug and a socializing drug, and it really does work. However, what we also know that when you get chronic alcoholism and you keep on drinking, this causes the sex drive to go down and the hostility drive to go up, and so you get a separation and you get a lot of hostility, and this also can make an ideal, and this is what the reputation of alcohol is, if you stop and think about it. Women, for instance, use this loss of control as an excuse to have sex. Now, think about a man and a woman, for instance, sitting around the same table, drinking out of the same bottle, that bottle being a sign of virility to the male and a sign of loss of control, or an excuse, if you will, to the female. In other words, it makes the prey a better prey and the predator a better predator, and there's no doubt that alcohol is always going to be very popular in our sexual social lives because it does work, and it works so well. As a matter of fact, it might be this working. This is what Vernon Johnson calls it works, and it works every time, to quote Vernon Johnson. This is maybe one of the things that causes all that faith in chemicals that increases our denial, because we expect and we need this sexual stimulation, this gregariousness that it caused, and we get, after years and years and years of it working so well, we can't believe that at this time now it's causing the very problem that it used to cure. It's causing the sexual dysfunction problem, it's causing the hostility problem, when in fact it used to help the drive, and it used to decrease the aggression drive, making us more intimate and making us more gregarious. And now it backfires and does just the opposite of that. There's also a condition called state-dependent learning. I think that's important to talk about. This was first discovered or talked about by Dr. David Smith of Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. And we know, for instance, clinically, at Brighton Hospital, I talked to a lot of the patients, and I would imply or say, your sex life probably isn't as good as it used to be, and they would agree with that, that certainly alcohol did interfere with their sex life, but they had some amount of sex life left, and they weren't satisfied with it, but they were more satisfied than with what happened when they stopped drinking. Some of those people that I would promise that their sex life would be better when they stopped drinking came back in a few months and would say, "Doc, you said it would get better, and it's worse. I can't perform at all now." And for a while, I had a hard time explaining that and reassuring those people because things had gotten worse when they stopped drinking. And I really didn't know the explanation of that until I talked to Dr. David Smith of Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, and he described what he called a state-dependent learning phenomena, especially as far as people who started drinking young. Now let me explain what state-dependent learning is. I'm sure some of you know this from the psychological point of view. If you teach a rat how to do something when the rat is sober, and you get that rat drunk, he won't remember what he learned to do sober. On the other hand, if you teach a rat how to do something drinking, he won't remember how to do it again unless you, if he sobers up, unless you give him something to drink again. In other words, if we learn something drinking, we'll remember it better drinking, and if we learn something sober, we'll remember it better sober. Now take a 12, 13-year-old kid who started on marijuana and alcohol and street drugs and all that when they were that age, and bring them right up to the time they're now 18, 19, 20 and in deep trouble with drugs, and they've had all of their sexual experiences in various states of mind except sober, and put them in a treatment center and have them get sober, and they leave that treatment center and they cannot function sexually. Why? Because they learned all their sexual erotica in various states of mind except sober, and they really have to learn that all over again or they will not be able to perform sexually. Dr. Smith described this group of people, and at first he thought they were hypersexual. He runs this place at Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, and he said he would discharge his youthful patients, and most of his patients were youthful, and he would know that they went down to the local pornographic movie theater, and they would spend 6 or 8 hours there masturbating, watching all this erotic movies, and he first thought these guys or gals are really hypersexual, until he thought about it more clearly, and after he knew them a number of months, and then he realized they were not hypersexual, they were practically asexual. It took all of that stimulation in order to get them to have an orgasm through masturbation with all the visual stimulation and so forth. So we have this situation with a lot of alcoholics, especially those who started drinking or using drugs soon. They have not learned their sexual erotica in sober states of mind, and if they get sober, they certainly will have more of a problem functioning. Now, some of this, of course, is due to the physiological changes that occur with drinking, too, because there are actually some physiological changes that occur with drinking that I'm not going to spend too much time about because this is covered pretty well in the literature. In fact, there's several tapes of mine around, and there's some articles, including the one in Alcoholism magazine that tells about this, and I have some other material I want to cover, and the time is limited. So I won't say too much about the physiological changes that occur with alcoholism and drug abuse, except to say they do occur. They're extremely important. There can be changes in the hormone levels, in the vascular, in the blood supply to the pelvic area, to the nerve supply to the pelvic area, and of course a lot of medication side effects that I will spend a minute talking about. But alcohol causes all of those changes, and you can tell which ones are due to physical causes or physiological causes especially in males, because males will not have morning or dream erections if it's due to a physical cause. Everything I've talked about to this time and everything that I will say after the physiological changes will not have the male will continue to have morning or dream erections, and the female will continue to lubricate during dreams, although that's harder to evaluate. And so you can tell that a physiological impotence, in other words, from all the psychological ones on that one thing. Now, alcohol causes, in addition to the vascular changes, blood clots in the pelvic organs, aneurysms, changes like diabetes and that in nerves. In addition to all those things, there is a drop in male hormones in both sexes. Small amounts of alcohol, as I mentioned a while ago, is an aphrodisiac. It increases the male hormone in both sexes and therefore increases sexual desire. We know from Dr. Kolodny's work at Masters and Johnson's and other research people that larger amounts of alcohol over a longer period of time lowers the male hormone level in both sexes, also lowers the luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland, lowers the male hormone level in both sexes, and therefore knocks out the sex life for a longer period of time. You don't get better the next morning. For instance, what can happen, we used to say at Brighton Hospital, well, I'm sure they still say it, that the desire to have sex will come back 5 days after your last drink. The ability to have sex does not come back until 2 months after your last drink. Now, LeClaire Bissell said a while ago that a lot of treatment centers have a magical 28-day period for treatment. Well, I don't know what all the reasons for those are, but I know that there'd be a lot more problems in treatment center if they went for 2 months period of time, because that desire comes back in 5 days, but the ability comes back does not come back until 2 months, and I think it's a good idea to get them out of there before there's a lot of problems. Incidentally, I might say a word about that right now, because you might get an impression from what I'm going to say this afternoon that I favor sexual dysfunction therapy in a treatment center, and I certainly do not. I don't think that there is no reason to have or need to have or even an indication to have any sexual therapy until the person has been out of treatment for at least 6 months and until they got all their personal relations going well and so forth. So while I think that what I'm saying this afternoon is important for alcoholics and the spouses of alcoholics to know as far as hope for the future, I do not mean to imply for a minute that a treatment center for alcoholism, a detox or a rehab is any period of time, is the period of time to be talking about treating sexual dysfunction problems. I think it's putting the cart before the horse, and the first thing, of course, to him is to get a quality sobriety, and then I think you can work on the sexual problems if they don't take care of themselves. Incidentally, that's one of the things my research has shown me, that 95% of the sexual dysfunction problems in alcoholics are self-limiting, and with the program of AA and total abstinence from all drugs and mind-altering drugs, the person does indeed recover spontaneously, and no type of sex therapy would be required anyhow. Now, there's some of the effects of drugs on sexual function, I think, is extremely important. It's especially important because a lot of alcoholics are placed on drugs by physicians for a lot of reasons, most of which are not too good. But let's take an example. Let's take the widow-widower syndrome. I was at Masters and Johnson's 6 or 7 years ago, and Masters and Johnson's had just then described the widow-widower syndrome. Now let me explain what that is. The widow-widower syndrome, Masters took a man by the name of John, we'll say, and he was 55 years old, and his wife was sick and dying of cancer. So he had no heterosexual sex for 2 years during that period of time, for 1 year during that period of time. Actually, she wasn't dead yet. She was sick for a year, so no heterosexual sex for a year. Then she died, and so no heterosexual sex for the second year. At the end of that, the reason I put it that way, heterosexual sex, because this phenomena is still supposed to go on even if John were to be masturbating during this period of time. At the end of 2 years, the widow lady down the street noticed how hungry and lonely John looked, and so she invited him over for dinner one night. And he goes, and it's surprising how close to the dining room bedrooms are in situations like this, you know. And they end up in the bedroom, and much to poor John's surprise, chagrin, and embarrassment, he isn't able to do a thing. This is what Masters and Johnson's called the widow-widower syndrome, otherwise known as the use it or lose it phenomenon. If you don't use it for 2 years, you lose it. Now, the reason I think that this is important in alcoholics is because for a lot of reasons, either because of arguments, divorces, too drunk to participate, the hormone levels, for a lot of reasons, a lot of alcoholics do not participate in sex for a couple of year period of time. They might not want to admit that to you, but believe me, it is absolutely true. Years can go by before they participate in sex. So they are indeed suffering from the use of their loser phenomena. Now let's take John. Now he just, either his wife died or he just gets out of a treatment center or whatever you want to look at it, and he doesn't understand that alcohol causes the sexual dysfunction, right? And so he goes to see this widow lady one night, and he isn't able to do anything, and much to poor John's surprise, chagrin, and embarrassment, he is shocked. So he goes to see his friendly family doctor, right? It's a natural thing to do. And he goes to, the doctor says, what are you here for, John? Sexual dysfunction? My God, John, how old are you? 55? What the hell do you expect, John? That's the dumb doctor that thinks anybody quits having sex at 55. Actually, that Maurice Chevalier put that correctly. He said the only difference between a 35-year-old man and a 70-year-old man is 35 years experience. Actually, there is one other difference, and at 35, you usually only need visual stimulation or the thought to have sex, where at 70, you do need the tactile stimulation, you need the foreplay thing, but otherwise, basically, really, there is no basic difference between the potential between a 35-year-old and a 70-year-old. But that's another story. What I want to talk about is John. Now, he's getting out of a treatment center. His wife had just died, and he finds himself unable to perform. He goes to see his doctor, and his doctor says, well, what do you expect at 55, John? But you have 3 problems here that I found in my physical examination that need to be taken care of. In the first place, he says, look how nervous you are. You're shaking and so forth. So John, he didn't know John was just stopped drinking, or because John usually won't go to see him when he's drinking. He don't want him to think he's an alcoholic, so he'll stop drinking a few days before he goes. So John, the doctor says, John, you've got shakes here. You are nervous, and he writes down on John's chart anxiety and nervous. Then he said, and you also have high blood pressure. And so he writes down, because most alcoholics, when they're withdrawn, have high blood pressure, right? So he writes down hypertension on John's chart. And then he says, and John, you are depressed. And of course, he would be depressed just over his sex life, let alone all of his drinking and all the problems he's in. But he writes down depression on John's chart. And before John leaves, he said, John, you've got 3 problems that need treatment here, and he doesn't mention a word about the drinking, of course. He says, you are nervous, so here's a prescription for Valium or Librium or Transine or one of those. So now John's alcohol problem has been reignited, if he ever did have any insights on it, as well as a sexual dysfunction problem made doubly worse. But the doctor isn't done yet, don't worry. He says, and here's a prescription for Eldamet or Reserpine or Guanethidine or Ismalin or Wellwolfia or one of those, and that's even worse than the other 2 for causing a sexual dysfunction. So now John's got a triple whammy. But the doctor isn't done yet. He says, John, and you are depressed. You need some Elavil or Tocophernyl or Mellaril or Thorazine, and if this guy is ever able to function again, it's going to be a sheer miracle, I can tell you. The reason I included this in the physiological types of sexual dysfunction is because there is some recent research done by Dr. Richard Leeuwenhoek of Harvard University that shows that abstinence causes a lowering of the hormone. I just said a while ago that alcohol over a long period of time causes the male hormone to drop, but also abstinence causes the male hormone to drop. So had we had John abstaining from sex for any reason, then he would have had a lower male hormone level, and he would have had a physiological reason as well as the widow-widower syndrome. To overcome the widow-widower syndrome, according to Masters and Johnson's, all you'd have to do is relearn that part of sex that you had forgotten for a couple of year period of time, and it would have worked out all right. According to Leeuwenhoek, such is not the case with everybody, because that male hormone level actually drops down from disuse, if you will, and in this case, some male hormone medication may very well have helped. Now, I don't suggest for a minute that everybody rush in and take male hormone, but I am saying that there is some recent research to show that this may be of more value than we thought it was for a period of time. Okay, the next category that I think we'll talk about is the intimacy problems. And intimacy disorders are really situational disorders if you stop and think about it. And they may, when you have an intimacy sexual dysfunction disorder, you may be sexual dysfunction with one person, but not with another person. Or there may be some situations that you will be dysfunctional with, or not with the others. Now, up to this time, I've been talking about the effects of alcohol that would occur and interfere with your sex life, no matter who your sexual partner was or where they are. This type of sexual dysfunction may or may not involve all of your sex partners, and this has got to do with how intimate you are. I think that it's worthwhile talking about intimacy, though, in the first place, because intimacy has got to do with what I talked about a while ago. If you've got to have a strong sex drive, or you have to have a sex drive, a symbiotic drive, and you have to have a drive for self-preservation, separation drive. And if you've got the right proportion to those two drives, they will come together, and you will have the ability to be intimate with someone. And intimacy, of course, is what alcoholics are very shy on, and we all know that an alcoholic can be lonely in a crowd, and he can live with somebody for years and never have any intimate feelings. Some of this is on a cultural basis, and there's certainly a difference between men and women when it comes to this. Women have a tendency to turn themselves off when it comes to sex, and men have a tendency to turn themselves on when it comes to sex. Now, if you went to Masters and Johnson down there, or if you have much knowledge about sex, you have discovered something in recent years that Masters and Johnson wrote about a few years ago, and that's that women are probably 20 times more sexual than men are. Since the discovery of the multiple orgasms and so forth, we now know that women are much more sexual than men. Men don't like to admit that, perhaps, but those are the facts. Now, what has women and what have men done about this discrepancy? Well, the women have been raised to believe that they're not supposed to be as sexual as men. As a matter of fact, Queen Victoria, on the wedding night of her daughters, would tell them, my dears, she said, just close your eyes and think of England. I mean, they weren't... Women thought they were not supposed to enjoy sex, and so they had this 20 times more potent sex drive than men, and so what did they do? But they turned themselves off. And if the women didn't do that because of the influences of the culture, the mothers made sure they did because they didn't want their daughters to get pregnant, and so they would make them have fear of pregnancy or fear of disease and all those things, and that would turn the girls off, and they would therefore preserve their virginity. On the other hand, males were taught to be masculine, to break away from their mothers. They weren't supposed to be emotional. They weren't supposed to cry. They weren't supposed to show their emotions. but they were supposed to be proud of their sexuality, and a boy couldn't be 3 years old without knowing about his penis and be proud of it and so forth. Nature cooperated with mothers in this situation because, you know, sex organs have three parts, right? They have a sensual part, a reproductive part, and an excretory part. And in boys, they all those three functions all come together in one place, the penis. It's a very sensual organ, and at 3 years of age, as I said, every boy knows about it, and he knows he gets enjoyment from it, and he is not ashamed of it, and so forth. Nature has hidden away, has made those three organs, the excretory, the sensual, and the reproductive. They put those in the woman's body to end in three different places, completely separate from one another, and they've hidden them away inside, so the girl can live to be 25 years old and not even know they're there. And this is literally and seriously the truth. And with her turnoffs, then she becomes ashamed of her sex life, and as opposed to the boy who is very proud of her sex life, and she is taught to turn herself off. Now, Nancy Friday, in her book My Mother and Myself, I think explains this as beautiful as anybody has ever done it, and I highly recommend that book. She said that women become ashamed of their sexuality where men become proud of their sexuality, and she said, for instance, women have to whisper and hush-hush about their periods and all that. She said if men had periods, men would find some way to brag about it. And I can see it now at some smokers some night, you know, the men are sitting around a table and some guy starts having his period. He would stand up and say, wow, I'm having a spontaneous emission. And that would start a topic of conversation. You only used 3 pads last month, I used 12 pads. So if you stop and think about women going through this and learning to turn themselves off like they have to do, it's not surprising then that men have their sexual maturity at a younger age of, say, 17, because they indeed, by our cultures, have been encouraged to turn themselves on, and women have been encouraged to turn themselves off, and they catch up with each other just about age 35, and it works out pretty good, where this is mostly cultural. People have thought, you know, there must be a mismatch here between men and women. I don't think it's a mismatch at all. It's simply that women have been taught to successfully turn themselves off, and men have been successfully taught to turn themselves on. This brings up the whole subject then of fantasies, because fantasy is the way you would resolve this problem, and fantasies, of course, are usually ridiculed especially by women. Now, we have a guilt towards fantasy dating back to childhood, because at 4 years old, the child cannot tell the difference between wishes and reality, and so he has ideas that he'd like to kill his parents sometime, or he hates them, and he wishes some things, and sometimes those things happen. So he or she has a guilt about fantasy. Furthermore, religions have come along and made fantasy, but they call it temptation, and they have made this bad. So a lot of people have hang-ups against fantasies or calling temptations, and they are afraid to use them. And I think fantasies are absolutely human and necessary for monogamy to survive. Now, if you stop and think about it, males are naturally polygamous. And when I say that, I'm not talking about human males, I'm talking about the animal male, because what is the animal male? How can he reproduce more of his own kind? He can reproduce more of his own kind by having multiple sex partners, right? If a male animal has 20 sex partners, he will reproduce 20 of himself in a year, and so that's biologically programmed to do that. A female animal, for instance, no matter how many male partners she may have, she will only reproduce one of her kind each year. So there's a natural inclination then for men to have multiple sex partners, where the woman is programmed to have only one, but she wants the best one that she can get. She wants the handsomest, the smartest, the best looking, the hardest working. She wants the very best. Now, fantasy is a way for both men and women to satisfy that natural desire. The man can fantasize multiple sex partners. The woman can fantasize the greatest sex partner, and therefore both of them can be satisfied with monogamy, and they can make their sex lives worse. For instance, there's the Coolidge phenomena that Dr. Simmons, Dr. Donald Simmons described in The Evolution of Human Sexuality. He called the Coolidge phenomena. It goes like this. The President Coolidge and his wife went to a chicken farm one day, and they were visiting the chicken farm, and the president's wife noticed that the roosters was having sex with the hens, and she said to the chicken farmer, does the rooster have sex just once a day? And the chicken farmer says, oh, heavens no. He says, the roosters have sex 20 times a day. And she says, will you tell President Coolidge that? So he goes over and he talks to President Coolidge, and he says, your wife wants you to know that the roosters have sex 20 times a day. And President Coolidge says, with the same hen? And the chicken farmer says, heavens no, with 20 different hens. He says, well, you go tell Mrs. Coolidge that. Well, that's... and in order for monogamy to occur, fantasy is a gift of God, if you will, to the human being, because it allows the man to satisfy that biological urge to have multiple sex partners by being happy in a monogamous situation, and it allows the female to have the strongest, best-looking, Robert Redford, you have it, partner, while she remains happy in a monogamous situation. So fantasies, then, are a way of overcoming these cultural turn-ons and turn-offs that have been instilled in us by our parents and so forth. Okay, there's also another type of intimacy problem, and that's with adjustment reactions. I mean, I've heard a few remarks about adjustment reactions, and certainly because of the alcohol situation, people grow further and further apart. Now, you stop and look at the basic tendency of human beings. We start out with our relationships with rituals, then we go to pastimes, then we go to play, and then we go to intimacy. And what happens when something interferes with that is we start playing games, because if we get hurt on the way, if we have a lot of arguments and fights and problems with our marriage, instead of going on to intimacy, we start playing games, because games are a way of avoiding intimacy. And we need to avoid intimacy to avoid vulnerability. Now, intimacy is probably necessary for human beings to survive. We know, for instance, that if you take a child and put him in an orphanage at 1 month of age, he actually becomes mentally retarded because he doesn't get any intimacy. That's why they closed all the orphanages. Well, we also know that God gave man and woman 5 opportunities to become intimate in their lifetime. They first of all had a chance to be intimate with their mother during the symbiotic relationship of infancy. They had a chance to become intimate with their sex partner, and that's what the surrender of virginity is all about, that instant intimacy you get with sex. I think God invented sex in order for human beings to be intimate, because intimacy is necessary for our development. If we missed it in the first 2 chances, we get a second opportunity when we have missed one, the chum, before we get intimate with our sex partner, we can become intimate with our chum. Chum relationships are exceedingly important in teenagers. Then with our spouse, then with our children, and then with our grandchildren. And I think alcoholics and Al-Anon people are especially important, are lucky because they have a chance to be intimate without vulnerability in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and AA meetings. I've always, from my first meeting, I knew that as soon as I walked in the door, there was instant intimacy there without vulnerability. And if AA works in multiple different ways, and I could spend the whole afternoon discussing how that is, but one of the ways it works is by giving you a chance to learn to be intimate again without vulnerability. And once you get a chance to be intimate again, then eventually you can take a chance and be vulnerable and get a relationship going. I forgot to look at what time we started. What time are we supposed to finish?
3:45.
Okay. The intimacy of alcoholic marriages depends on what kind of a relationship you have. And let me describe the three types of alcoholics that I think there are. We've heard about the gamma alcoholic and the delta alcoholic. I basically think there are three types of alcoholics. There's a born to succeed alcoholic, there's a born to win alcoholic, and there's a born to lose alcoholic. The born to succeed alcoholic is a man or woman who has guilt and goals. The born to win alcoholic has no guilt but lots of goals. And the born to lose alcoholic has no goals and no guilt. The born to succeed alcoholic is the workaholic, the guy who has two jobs, he's guilty about his drinking, and he always marries a little orphan Annie, someone who cannot cry because he needs somebody who doesn't need to depend on him for emotions, but they depends on him for his finances, like Daddy Warbucks, right? And if that born to succeed alcoholic person becomes an alcoholic, then that little orphan Annie becomes a blamer or an enabler. Now, the born to win alcoholic, the one who has no guilt, he's the hail fellow, well met, belly up to the bar sort of a guy. The typical CIA, Catholic Irish and alcoholic. He's happy-go-lucky. He just loves to drink, and he doesn't understand why everybody isn't doing it, and he's married to Cinderella because they live in a magic world, and they're just waiting for their ship to come in, and they take a lot of chances. The born to lose alcoholic, and that person always is an enabler also. And then we have the born to lose alcoholic who is married to Snow White in the Snow White, and he's a loser, if you will, and she's willing to change him, and if she can't change him, she'll exchange him for one of the other 7 little defective people that she can marry, and go on marrying one right after the other until she thinks she can overcome this. Now, the whole secret to all of these is they all think they can overcome it. The first one by blaming the man, making him change. The second one by enabling the man, waiting for the magical, mysterious change to occur. And the last one by controlling the little defective person. But all of these games actually bring those people further and further and further apart. The games alcoholics play, if you read Claude Steiner, consist of 3 basic types of games: first-degree games, second-degree games, and third-degree games. The first-degree games are cops and robbers, or look what you made me do, or look how hard I've tried. The second-degree games, we've heard a lot about them at this meeting. They're murder, or who wears the pants in this family, or somebody needs a new baby, or I need a new baby, or we'll stick together for the sake of the children. I mean, that's a good one. That's a second-degree game that avoids a lot of intimacy, avoids a lot of vulnerability, and puts on a false front. Third-degree games are drunk and proud of it, lush or lady, and you can overcome that vulnerability through AA meetings. Supposing he is a she, supposing it's the female who is an alcoholic. What happens in this situation? Well, let's see what happens in this situation. What are females looking for when they get married? They've all been raised to believe that someday some man will come and kiss her on the cheek and she will live happily ever after, right? This is called someday my prince will come theory. No pun intended. Someday some guy is going to come and kiss her on the cheek and she will live happily ever after. And that's okay, but what happens if that female is an alcoholic, and that way she is prone to believe that everything that happens is his fault, the prince's fault, you see, because that's the way she was raised. If I'm not happy, it's because of him. And that is okay if you're not an alcoholic, but if you're an alcoholic, that's denial, because you're saying then that your problem is not your booze or your pills, but it's his fault, and when you think you got a problem that is caused by somebody else, there's only two things you can do about it. Number one, you can go out and look for another prince. That's a barfly, and that's what Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs does. She gets exchange one little defective man for another little defective man. So you go out and look for another prince. That's what 10% of them do. 90% of them become depressed. And that's what happens to most female alcoholics. Depression is very common in both males and female alcoholics, but 60% of all the suicides performed in this country are performed by males, but 60% of all the suicides by alcoholics are performed by females. So more alcoholic females are committing suicide than alcoholic males, yet according to Dr. Goodwin this morning, I agree with him, the males still outnumber the females 5 to 1. So this is a horrendous problem as far as females with the depression, because they indeed think they have a problem that nobody can fix, and therefore they go out and try to either get another prince or become very depressed and commit suicide. Now, the way to overcome these, of course, is to use this dysfunction, is to use that fantasy that I mentioned, and to overcome the differences between males and females as far as performance and pleasure. Males emphasize sex as far as performance is concerned. Females emphasize relationships as far as intimacy is concerned. Now, what you have to do is, of course, make the females give them an edge on performance, and make the males more prone to have intimacy. And that's what Masters and Johnson's technique That's what Masters and Johnson's technique of sensate focus does. It takes the emphasis off of performance and puts it on to pleasure. It simply teaches the person that if you have a relationship for pleasurable purposes, then performances will happen. And then of course it teaches the female that she does not have to be ashamed of her sexuality, and that makes her performance better, and the two together work very well. Actually, the best way to overcome intimacy problems is to form a perfect marriage. And a perfect marriage is defined by Peter Martin as two people who are equally independent, mutually dependent, with reciprocal obligations. And when Peter Martin drew that picture on a board at a seminar I was at, I said, my God, no wonder AA works so well. That's exactly the way AA works. AA is the alcoholic goes to his meetings, stands on his own 2 feet, grows tall and straight. The Al-Anon member goes to his or her own meeting, stands on his or her own 2 feet and grows tall and straight, and the two together make something greater, a whole greater than either one standing alone. So it's not surprising then that AA is an ideal situation for overcoming sexual dysfunction problems. I might say that that same scheme up there is a description of women's lib, and women's lib is God's gift to women, God's gift to men as far as a sexually dysfunctional man is concerned, because it takes the responsibility off of him to perform. Remember that a lot of men become impotent because they have a fear of performance, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so if women's lib is saying, you are not responsible for our lives, including our sex lives. Reminds me of those, the two people who met in the bar and they wanted to know each other better, so they go across the street to the motel, and she takes off all her clothes and he takes off all his clothes, and he gets his clothes all off, and she looks down at him, and he's not endowed too well in the sex department, you know. She looks at him really disappointed, and she says, she said, who do you expect to satisfy with that? He looks at her completely undaunted, and he said, me. So this is what the sensate focus of Masters and Johnson's is all about. It puts the emphasis on pleasure and not on performance, and that makes the female more prone through fantasy and learning how to perform sexually, having her increase the performance and having the male decrease his performance and put more emphasis on pleasure. Next category I want to talk about is disorders of self-esteem. And disorders of self-esteem are divided into anxiety disorders and situational anxiety. Anxiety disorders are actually internal anxiety. But, you know, Dr. Goodloe talked about the stimulus augmenters, and I think that's exactly correct. And alcoholics do have increased anxiety, and they learn that alcohol decreases that and makes them feel more normal, and they get so they can depend on that. But let's see what that does as far as our sex life is concerned. For instance, if a man or a woman has a desire to have sex, he feels that as an increase in tension, right? If I want to have sex and I'm deprived for a short while or whatever, I feel increased in tension. That tension goes on until I have sex, and then the tension in my body goes down. Now, what happens if I'm an alcoholic and I become addicted to alcohol? I have a desire to have sex. How does have a drink? How does my body feel that? My body feels that as an increase in tension. I want to have a drink, I'm more tense. That tension goes on until I drink, and then the tension goes down. You might say, the human body, can't tell the difference very well between a drop in tension from having sex or a drop in tension from having a drink. It also can't tell the difference very well from the tension from a desire for a drink and the tension from a desire to have sex. You might say that poor person doesn't know whether he's horny or thirsty at a time like that. But eventually, of course, the next morning he's raring to go, and a lot of binge drinkers will tell you that, and even alcoholics in their early drinking years will say, well, it's true that that alcohol satisfied my sexual tension the night before, but the next night next morning I was really raring to go. And that's true until some of these other things that I talked about start setting in, and then, of course, the ability to perform is not there either the night before or the next morning. The other thing that occurs as far as anxiety is concerned is fear, and fear, especially fear of or low self-esteem or fear of performance. Masters and Johnson described the fear of performance thing, and they said that fear of performance varies all the way from frustration to panic. And if you want to know what frustration is, it's the first time you can't do it the second time. Panic is the second time you can't do it the first time. This is called fear of performance. And it goes like this. It's a real thing, it's an anxiety thing. It's got to do with that stimulus augmenters. If I'm walking down a dark alley in the middle of the nighttime, all by myself, and somebody jumps out at me and says boo and scares me, what happens is my adrenal gland puts out adrenaline, so I start shaking, and I got the energy then to fight like hell or run. Well, the same thing occurs, of course, in the situation where you have an opportunity to have sex and you fail. The next time you have an opportunity to have sex and you fail, the third time you got that anxiety and you wouldn't be able to perform under any circumstances. And if you don't believe that, imagine yourself walking down the dark alley in the middle of the nighttime all alone sometime, and somebody jumping out at you and saying, "Boo, I want to know if you're going to stop and have sex any time like that." I can assure you it'll be the furthest thing from your mind and ability, and this mad cat here illustrates that, because that cat is mad and angry and scared, and everything is standing up on him except the things necessary in order to have sex. Getting back to the situational anxieties, actually we have, let's talk about self-preservation. If you have, let's go on to the situational anxieties. Situational anxieties have got to do with shame, guilt, or loss of self-esteem. And the loss of self-esteem, you can see how that readily happens if that depends on your status. For males especially, because a lot of males, their job and so forth means status. And if a male has an image of himself of what it is to be a male, usually involves having a job, having a family, disciplining the kids, wife staying home, not working, taking care of the kids and all. That's his image of a male, and that's fine. Supposing he becomes an alcoholic, and he loses his job, his wife goes out to work, the kids won't be disciplined by him because they have no respect for him, he loses his status, and therefore he loses his gender or role identification. This can end up in him having not only low self-esteem, but he isn't really sure he's a male. When I was in medical school 20 plus years ago, the psychiatrists all thought that by definition, alcoholics were either latent or overt homosexuals.
Excuse me, Dick. We have a very important call.
Okay.
Is there a Tony Susanello in the audience?
Tony Susanello?
Something very... there's a call they're holding for you upstairs. Very important.
Okay.
About that?
Yeah, just weighing up in there. Okay. The psychiatrist thought that all alcoholics were homosexual, and of course there was reason to believe that, because after all they sort of acted like homosexuals. They spent a lot of time with the people of the same sex. They were unable to perform sexually, and they were hostile towards the opposite sex. Now, of course, we know that this is not the case, but that they may be experimenting homosexually in order to they may either be using homosexuality as an opportunistic experience, or they may be using homosexuality because they are so inadequate, or it may be situational where they're in jail or so forth. They may have an avoidance homosexuality because they're avoiding the same sex or the opposite sex, or it might be intermittent homosexuality, or it might be experimental. Okay, in closing, I think only one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's that whenever you get the phobias and fear of the opposite sex and low self-esteem, a lot of people respond to that by avoidance, one of the best ways of avoiding an intimate partner is having affairs. And alcoholics have affairs not to increase relationships a lot of time, but they have affairs to decrease, either to raise their own self-esteem or lower the self-esteem of somebody else. And if you can have an affair to raise your own self-esteem, there can be an attempt to get autonomy, to get your sex life revived, to prove that you're not inadequate, to overcome frustrations of sexual deprivation, or to even it up. You can have affairs to overcome sexual dysfunction by trying to experiment, by novelty, by inadequacy, or even by homosexuality. You can have affairs to lower the self-esteem of the other people, and they are infidelity, jealousy affairs, manipulative affairs, or revenge affairs. Hastening along to the affairs to avoid intimacy, they are indeed avoidance affairs, performance affairs, or combative affairs. But most of those affairs, or all of those affairs, should be avoided because they all end up in escalating affairs, which usually decrease any intimacy that you may be seeking or after. There's also the accidental affairs that I call coyote affairs, and they only happen to alcoholics, and a coyote affair happens in a blackout. I don't know if you ever heard about them or not, but during a blackout, some some guys end up in a hotel room not remembering a thing they did the night before, to wake up the next morning with some dog in his arm. Doesn't know her name or how he got there, but he feels like chewing off his arm and sneaking out of the room before she wakes up. Okay, I'm sorry to have rushed through the last part of that. The timing was not off, but the message, of course, is that alcohol and alcoholism causes a lot of sexual dysfunction problems in multiple different ways. And sum and substance, however, is that the vast majority of those types of sexual dysfunctions disappear by stopping drinking, going to AA meetings, and overcoming the intimacy problems through the AA program. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.